Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Incorporating Inclusion event that we are hosting in partnership with the Gill Foundation and the Irving-Las Colinas Chamber of Commerce. I'm Shanique Street, the Senior Director of Economic Opportunity and Empowerment at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation. For those of you who may not be familiar with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, we are the 501c3 affiliate of the Chamber of Commerce, and we believe in the power of business to solve our toughest problems. We are the leading resource on how businesses do well, do good, and prepare for the future. And we come to work every day with this mission because when businesses thrive, communities thrive. So today you'll hear from business leaders in the Irving-Las Colinas region as they highlight the importance of diversity and inclusion, and primarily LGBTQ+ inclusiveness in business and society. Through the Chamber Foundation's partnership with the Gill Foundation, we aim to provide resources for businesses, small and large, as they create inclusive workplaces and businesses. You'll also hear from my colleague Wes Combs, who frequently says that inclusion must be intentional, and it is not accidental. Before Wes begins his presentation, I would like to thank the Gill Foundation for their support and the Irving-Las Colinas Chamber of Commerce for their partnership. With that, I would like to introduce you to Beth Bowman, President and CEO of the Irving-Las Colinas Chamber of Commerce and Irving Economic Development Partnership. Beth, over to you.
Thanks, Shanique. Good morning. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. As was shared, I'm Beth Bowman. I have the privilege to serve as the President and CEO of the 5-star Greater Irving-Las Colinas Chamber of Commerce and the Irving Economic Development Partnership. I just want to say thank you to our partners at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation for developing today's program, Incorporating Inclusion. We greatly value our long-term partnership with our friends at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the work that we do together to support our chamber's missions while advocating federal legislative priorities for our member investors. As many of y'all know, Irving-Las Colinas is one of the most diverse cities in the country and was ranked second in the nation by personal finance website finder.com. More than 90 nationalities are represented throughout our city with numerous languages spoken. Inclusion, our Chamber's DEI Fellow Program, provides an opportunity for business leaders of diverse groups to serve on our board of directors for the Greater Irving-Las Colinas Chamber of Commerce and in other volunteer leadership capacities. You're going to have the pleasure to hear from some of our board members throughout today's conversation. I'll share, even as diverse and inclusive that our community is, we understand that grappling with DE&I related issues can be challenging and at times even uncomfortable. We also know that inclusion policies are vital to recruiting and retaining top talent, and that focus is critical for long-term business success. Our chamber team remains deeply committed to the work that helps develop and apply strategies that support our member investors' inclusion efforts. Really, our goal here at the chamber is to serve as a safe place for our member investors and to foster authentic conversations that support businesses of all sizes and lead to positive outcomes and progress for our DE&I efforts. Again, thank you to our longtime partners at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. We look forward to today's forum and to continuing the conversation around incorporating inclusion. I'm going to transition it over to Wes.
Thank you, Beth, and welcome everybody to today's session. I'd like to talk a little bit about who I am and why you're going to be hearing from me. As Shanique said, my name is Wes Combs, and I've focused my career on helping organizations create more diverse, equitable, and inclusive workplaces. And today, we're going to speak about inclusion, what makes inclusion happen, what are the barriers to inclusion, and specifically, what are the issues that LGBTQ employees face in the workplace. Will, are you going to bring up the slides? There we go. Perfect, thank you. If you could go to the first slide. Second slide, actually. So a little bit about me as we go into this. Myself, I've experienced discrimination in the workplace in my career. I had a job with a major corporation and in the late 80s and was assigned to a highly classified account, which required getting a security clearance. And at the time, you could not get a security clearance if you were LGBTQ. And it required me to have to come out to someone at my employer to understand, to see what would the risks be if I went through the process and failed the clearance. And so there were times in my life where being LGBTQ created unknowns for me. So today we're going to talk a lot about that. And through that, we want to first start with understanding what is the challenge that companies, whether they're two-person companies or they're 300,000-person companies, are facing in today's job market. Many people have been hearing about the thing called the Great Resignation or the Great Quit. But the reality is that the size of the US workforce has shrunk since its peak in early 2020. According to the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, as of June, the labor force is roughly 3 to 3.5 million workers smaller than its pre-pandemic projection. At the same time, US businesses are facing the highest employee turnover rate in 17 years, as well as increased competition for workers with the necessary skills and qualifications and job requirements. In fact, according to Gartner, the annual employee turnover rate in the US is set to jump by 20% this year, with a total of 37.4 million professionals quitting their jobs. That's a significant rise over the average of 31.9 million. And it reinforces the importance of employers to have tactics that ensure that they can attract and retain talent at all, but certainly the best talent. Next slide, please. So what's driving this supply issue? Certainly COVID was one outcome of COVID was employers were forced to maintain their operations, mostly remote environment. And those employees who worked remotely often liked it. And as a result, they have more leverage in negotiating whether or not they want to come back to work and under what conditions. So workplace safety is one of those drivers. A survey found that of remote workers who would consider leaving their jobs, that if they were asked to go back to work to the office before they felt safe, that the likelihood that they would consider leaving their job was as high as 55% as of January 6th of this year. That also leads to flexibility, meaning that what employees found is that they could work from anywhere and likely could work from the times that, as long as they got their job done, they had a lot of flexibility. So employers have been struggling to figure out how to create that flexibility at the same time. And there are situations where employees just feel that flexibility isn't sufficient enough for them to want to come back to work. But really what we're going to focus on a lot here is the culture. The culture of an organization really, especially considering who's in the workforce today, which we will get to in a minute, is one of the most complicating factors, because there are studies that continue to show that one of the best ways for employers to retain employees is to feel valued. And a recent Inc. magazine article cited findings from MIT Sloan Management Review and reported that a toxic workplace culture is by far the strongest predictor of attrition and is 10 times more important than compensation in predicting turnover. They also said that the leading elements to toxic cultures include failure to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion, workers feeling disrespected, or when they see unethical behavior. And so this is what is creating challenges for HR executives to ensure that they are seeing also increased engagement requests for DE&I over the last 2 years. But at the end of the day, US Secretary of Labor Marty Walsh summed it up this way. Everyone talks about the Great Resignation, and I think that what we've seen is not necessarily resigning from work, but resigning from their jobs, a job that was not fulfilling enough for folks. Next slide, please. So what is diversity, equity, inclusion, it's certainly been the topic that's in the news a lot. And if any employer knows, it is a factor in having success in today's workforce. The shifting demographics are requiring business leaders to understand how the diversity of employees impacts how they do their work, how they create cultures that are welcoming. And it really matters to today's job seekers. In fact, a Glassdoor survey in 2021 showed 76% of job seekers and employees reported a diverse workforce as an important factor when evaluating companies and job offers. Now, what's most important, I would say, within this context is that millennials, who according to the US Census will comprise 75% of the workforce by 2025, they rank diversity, equity, and inclusion as a top criteria about whether or not they will go work for a company or stay working for a company. And in fact, other data from Randstad's Work Monitor report in 2022 showed that 41% of millennials said they wouldn't work for a company that didn't promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. Next slide. So as we've been talking about this, I look at this as a funnel. So we've been talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion on the broad, the workforce on the broad range, how diversity, equity, and inclusion is making the workforce smaller based on how well an employer addresses those issues. And now we're talking about the specific segment of LGBTQ workers. And what many people may not realize is that despite all of what people may see as the progress in creating a more equitable world for LGBTQ people, that there are still a lot of reasons why LGBTQ people are leaving their jobs, and a lot of it has to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion. LGBTQ employees still lack complete legal protections in more than half of the US states, where laws do not explicitly prohibit employment discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. In these areas, being out as an LGBTQ person can be grounds for dismissal. In fact, the survey showed that it's hard to believe this statistic every time I see it, that 1/2 of LGBT employees said that they are not open about being LGBT to their current supervisor for fear of repercussions. That is really a shocking statistic as someone who's been doing this work for a long time. And about 1/3 of LGBT employees report leaving a job. 34.2% are looking for other jobs because the environment did not accept LGBT people. And this is why we are here today. This is the reason we're all together. Next slide, please. The purpose of today's conversation is to help business owners understand, or people who work in businesses, why LGBT inclusion matters when it comes to attracting and retaining not only talent, but your clients and your customers. This is the reason why the Gill Foundation partnered with the US Chamber of Commerce Foundation to provide the resources needed accessible to anyone, regardless of annual sales or number of employees, and it's free. And that's in the form of the regional forums like the one we're doing today. We also have completed one in the city of Charlotte and the city of Columbus. But right now you can go to this website and you can receive info, you can learn about what are the barriers to inclusion, what are the tools that employers can learn to help them either take that first step or take that next step in creating a more LGBT inclusive workplace. There are a number of resources here. And as we go through today's program, we're going to talk about the challenges and the tips and lessons learned from employers that are on the smaller side and all the way up to a company that has 300,000 employees. But regardless of where you sit right now, it's important to remember that everybody can take a step forward. And as Shanique said, I always say this, inclusion is an intentional act. It does not happen accidentally. And sure, you're going to make mistakes at times. The important thing to remember is as long as you recognize that you may have made a mistake and you commit to continuing to achieve the goal that you've stated, wherever that goal is, you're going to create an authentic commitment, and you're going to demonstrate that authentic commitment to your employees, to your customers, and you'll hear the reasons why and how this does impact the bottom line of your organization, and also ultimately how individuals feel fulfilled and happy to work somewhere. Because if we're going to spend a significant amount of our lives working, we should be enjoying it, and we should feel like it's a place that welcomes us. So with that, I will turn it back over to Shanique.
Thank you, Wes. Thank you for that wonderful presentation and just providing an overview of the labor market and how these issues affect all community members, and particularly the LGBTQ+ community. With that being said, I would like to now transition to our next panel, Businesses Large and Small, Making Progress One Day at a Time. And with that, I will ask Felicia Johnson and Tabitha Turner to join us. Thank you.
And hello again, I'm back, and I'm looking forward to starting the first of two sessions that will start to get into more specifics about what we're talking about and how it comes to life in organizations today. So hold on one second, I've got the wrong screen in front of me. So the joys of technology. Okay. So today, we're going to start our conversation out with two individuals who have specific experience in creating inclusive workplaces. First, I'll introduce the individuals, but I'm going to then ask each of them to provide an introduction of themselves, which will include what your roles and responsibilities are at your organization, how long you have worked for the company and in your role, and how many employees your company has and how many locations. And as I said at the top of this, it doesn't matter if the company has got 300,000 employees or whether it's got 2. Everybody can take a step. And that's what we're here to. We don't want people to think about this as, oh my God, I can't do anything. So first we have Felicia Johnson, who is a certified diversity professional and founder and managing director of the Gadsden Group. And when she introduces herself, she'll also indicate where she's worked prior to her current role, because she has a lot of great experience to share with us. And then we have Tabitha Turner, who is one of the owners of the MMC Group, and her title is Director of Managed Accounts, and that is, she will explain more about what that company does in a second. So first, I would like to ask Felicia. Felicia, tell us about your what your role and responsibilities are, and the 3 questions I talked about.
Absolutely. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Wes and Shanique and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation for this incredible opportunity, and definitely looking forward to having a robust and great conversation through the rest of our time together. So again, I'm Felicia Johnson. I'm the founder and managing director of the Gadsden Group. It is a diversity and inclusion consulting firm based in Dallas, Texas. Prior to that, I served as the global manager of diversity for the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company, head of diversity at Cabela's, and co-lead of diversity for Nissan North America. And about 4 years ago now, I stepped out on a whole lot of faith and started my own practice. And so that's what I'm doing. Again, been doing this for about 4, maybe 4.5 years now. And right now, there's just one employee, and you're looking at her. And so in terms of responsibilities, everything. But I am really blessed, and again, just really looking forward to the conversation today. So thank you.
Thanks, Felicia. Tabitha, you're up.
All right. I'd like to second Felicia's comments on the thank yous for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and for you, Wes and Shanique. This is a great opportunity, so I appreciate the opportunity to be here. My name again is Tabitha Turner. I am the Director of Managed Accounts and a shareholder, principal owner of MMC Group. We're a strategic staffing company based out of Dallas, Texas. We've been in business for about 31 years. I have been with the firm almost 23. So I don't have as many exciting opportunities to talk about prior to the current one as Felicia did, but having been with MMC for almost 23 years, I have ranged everywhere from a recruiter up to the recruiting manager, where now I lead a team of what we call account managers or business development folks. So my team is responsible for going out and not only finding new business, but educating our clients, working with our recruiting teams and HR and general counsel, staying up to date with labor laws and making sure that we are getting the right talent for the right clients and making sure that everybody's getting that next employee that they need. So.
Thank you, Felicia and Tabitha. And I'm going to start with you, Felicia. When someone asks you what inclusion means in the workplace, how do you answer the question?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I typically do one or two things. Number one, I'm an educator, I'm an instructor, I'm a master facilitator offering, certified diversity training. So I'm a teacher, right? So what I mean by that is it's important to make certain that we level set in terms of what inclusion even means, right? So, I kind of take it back to a definition type, perspective. And so when we think about inclusion, it's talking about how you're leveraging the diversity that you have. And I love what you said earlier about the intentionality. Contrary to popular belief, you're not inclusive simply because you say you are. You are inclusive as a result of the things that you do, whether they are LGBTQ plus friendly policies, language. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And so when you ask me the question, how do I define it? Again, I just really open it up to a conversation and say, well, what does that look like in your organization? And then the other thing I think it's important to add to, Wes, is to make certain that, whoever you're talking to knows, I always call it the relative of inclusion, and that's diversity. Diversity is inclusion's cousin, right? They're close cousins. And so making certain that there's an understanding that they're not the same thing, right? And guess what else? You can have one and not have the other. And so again, when we talk about diversity, we're referring to all of those unique attributes that make us who we are. And then when we talk about inclusion, it's how you leverage that. How do you leverage that rich tapestry that every one of your employees brings to the workplace every day? So that is typically how I respond to that question.
You make a really good point here. And this is something in the work that I do with clients that I always start, I said, diversity means something different to every person.
Yes.
In today's world, when an organization says we're going to start to focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, your employees are coming to the table with expectations based upon their experiences in life already, their lived experience, their experience working for your company, or their previous experience. And it's really critical that there's a level set at the very beginning that when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we're talking about this definition here, this definition for inclusion, this definition for equity. And I always recommend that clients start with creating a mission statement and a vision about what that means for your company. You cannot solve everybody's problems. And you're going to get asked to be very granular with addressing the needs of every single nuance and segment of diversity based on demographics and other aspects. But working together with your employees, developing that collective vision is something that will ensure that people know what it is and what it isn't, because you can't do everything.
And one last thing on that, you just said something so critical. Working with your employees, make certain that they are part of the conversation, right? Just don't come into the room with the big banner, putting it up on the wall, right? Give them an opportunity to actually engage and let them be part of those conversations. Because I promise you, when they are a part of it, guess what? Your initiatives and your programs and your actions have a higher likelihood to actually sustain themselves.
So I want to go on one housekeeping item that people who are, I can't see who's on the webinar, but if you would like to ask any questions during this seminar, please go into the Q&A, not the chat, and put your questions there. And at the end of the different segments, we'll do our best to get to some of those questions. So I want to continue with you, Felicia. As someone who's helped create inclusive workplaces for LGBTQ people, as well as other employees at companies like Nissan North America and Goodyear, what can you tell the audience about the steps necessary to get there?
Well, okay, again, a great question. So, two things come to mind when I think about that. So, number one, Wes, I oftentimes advise organizations, or again, as part of the conversation, is to really take assess where you are on what we call in this industry the diversity continuum, right? Where are you on the scale? Are you just starting, or are you at the what I call the CSI, where you're part of the DNA, right? Or maybe you're somewhere in between. And so really assess where you are. And that's going to be important simply because you want to make certain that your actions are aligning with where you are, right? We want to put out programs and initiatives and actions that the organization can actually, that the organization can actually handle, that the employees are actually ready for. Again, back to your earlier question about, inclusion. I have companies all the time. Well, Felicia, can you come in and do an unconscious bias workshop because we're having some issues? Okay, well, let's again just sort of, pump our brakes and say, okay, let's take a deep breath. Where are we? And how did we get here? And again, when you take that approach, I believe it's going to make it a lot easier for you, to certainly be on the other side of putting some things into place that is definitely going to work. And again, we talked about, being purposeful. Again, when you assess where your organization is on that diversity continuum, usually when you're in that purposeful stage, the light bulb has come on. And the organization recognizes, wow, this diversity and inclusion, program, or what we're thinking about doing, could actually be a real game changer for us as an organization in terms of positively impacting our organizational culture, as well as maybe even, having an impact on wider market share and customer segment and market growth. And then the other thing on that too, Wes, I would say that the organization take a close look at your workplace policies and benefits and say, hey, is there anything that we can do better, right? Is our language inclusive? Are our policies LGBTQ plus friendly? Do we offer, right, some semblance of domestic partner benefits? Because I can tell you that too many people in the LGBTQ plus community face barriers when it comes to healthcare. And so we want to make certain that all of our employees are doing every single thing that they can to be supportive, because guess what? Every employee is deserving of an inclusive experience.
You make so many great points. And one couple of things that I want to just highlight here for the audience is that there's a lot of resources online to help an organization figure this out. If you're in the Dallas area, there's an LGBTQ Chamber of Commerce actually that can help with some of this. You don't have to spend a lot of money. There's a lot of information online, but having a plan and understanding what's the goal, what do we need to do, what's the thing we can do first that's the low-hanging fruit, like creating a gender neutral bathroom, for example, making sure that my employees, if they understand what pronoun usage means when it comes to this community. And so those are really important. And if you go to the hub, you'll see some of those tools and resources there right away that can help you. So Tabitha, I'm going to shift to you. And as someone who actually probably works with some of the smaller companies as well, what does it mean? What does inclusion mean at MMC Group? How do you answer that question?
So I'll take it differently. Felicia addressed it more from the employees after they've been hired. So being a staffing company, I'll take it a step backwards and talk about inclusion from the hiring perspective. I think a lot of companies, when they're going to hire, everybody knows that little EEOC disclaimer on your new hire paperwork that says we don't discriminate based on age, race, religion, those types of things. But that's exclusion, not inclusion. So for me, that says every candidate that we talk to, we will not exclude anybody or not count them out because of that. But that is not inclusion. Inclusion, when you think about hiring practices, is things like communication, partnership, transparency, education, to Felicia's point, and education including tolerance and empathy for management, how to work with the LGBTQ staff. But when I think of hiring, and the best way I can describe inclusion from a hiring practice is a pathway. You've got to create the avenue of how do you generate the candidate pool from a particular community of people. So we can't, as organizations, no matter how big or small, you can't force an applicant to apply for a job, come out to an interview, accept a job offer. You can, however, make sure that you create the pathway for all of these applicants to see what kind of opportunities your organization has. So that pathway not only includes job postings, but it's your digital footprint. What are you doing on social media? How are you getting your name out there? And from the employee culture perspective, how do you share that path with everybody so that they recognize you as an employer they would want to go to work for, which then generates that application? So when I think about, I started with MMC almost 23 years ago, and recruiting has changed so much. Today, you're getting applicants off of TikTok and Facebook and all of these different channels that we didn't have in the late 90s and early 2000s. So we have to adapt to the times. And so getting out there, whether it's, you don't have to be a member of the LGBTQ community to celebrate Gay Pride Month. You don't have to be African American to celebrate or knowledge, do some knowledge transfer or some educational things with your existing staff or post on social media. You don't have to be African American to do that for Black History Month. But you as an organization have that obligation and that opportunity, more so than anything else, to create that path for yourself that shows that you are tolerant, you are encouraging, you are engaging with all communities, but specifically the LGBTQ community.
So you raise a lot of interesting and very valuable points. And when it comes to reaching out, if anybody is hiring today and you're being faced with a challenge or an objective or a goal of creating a more diverse workforce, where you advertise for that job is going to help ensure that your pool is more diverse. If you're working with a company like Tabitha's, making sure you inform the firm that you want to make sure that your pool is diverse when they submit candidate pools to you, and tell them what your objectives are. What percentage would you like it to see to be African American? What percentage would you like to be by gender? Now, with LGBTQ, people don't always necessarily self-identify, but you can make sure that there are job sites that are specifically targeting that community, that where there's the likelihood of individuals. And also there's a lot of organizations now that, especially if you're looking for college graduates, there's LGBTQ student organizations that have career sites. So it's being intentional about where you're going to look for this talent. And it's also making sure that the language that the people who are doing the recruiting use shows a knowledge and an awareness and a sensitivity to LGBTQ issues. Mm-hmm. Having people tell you what their preferred pronouns are on your form. So when you meet them, they'll tell you up front. Making sure your demographic forms include options that include transgender, non-binary, so that you can they have the choice to self-identify, but the more information you have coming into it, the more prepared you'll be. Now the question, so as I mentioned earlier, millennials will comprise 75% of the workforce by the year 2025. And research shows that one of the drivers of retention is whether a company makes DE&I a priority. Tabitha, how do you help companies seeking to fill roles in today's challenging job market understand this value proposition? What are you telling them that is important for them to be doing to, once they've hired the person, you talked about recruiting here, but what are the things that I remember when we spoke, you talked about people focusing on the gay thing versus not the job qualification thing. Mm-hmm. And so what are some of the things that you're, in the conversations you're having with employers?
So for our clients specifically, one of our largest and longest standing clients is actually ranked #1 in the United States and in the top 50 in the world for their DE&I practices, which I think is fantastic. So we've got a great partnership with them. We engage with them a lot on different events that they're doing, different things that they go out and do, understanding what kind of knowledge transfer and education and training they're doing for their management. But at the end of the day, a lot of what we're doing with our clients is we are supplying them with candidates that we have already gone out and interviewed. So we are preparing them similar to what you said about the pronouns and more knowledge up front, where when we're scheduling interviews with our clients, we're talking to them in advance to say, I have this resume. This person prefers to go by this name, or this is the pronoun. So we do talk about a lot of those things up front, but when we're engaging with clients on either new requests or their new clients, those are questions that we're asking. What is your DE&I practices for you at corporate? What are your goals? What percentage of hiring are you trying to do? Where are you guys getting your talent? What activities are you as an organization doing? Where can we partner with you? And, a lot of companies, I think, feel like the biggest problem when you're talking about hiring is you interview applicants based on their skill set, and your intention is to make a job offer based on qualified candidates. So that's a skill set. That's not what they look like. That's not how they self-identify. That's not their sexual orientation. However, again, going back to what I said about the pathway, it's the generation of the applicants that you get and how you go about it. Whether it's, talking to our clients about, hey, we're going to target this particular market may have a good group of LGBTQ churches or school programs and things like that. So we're talking to each client about local markets, where we can partner with them, what opportunities they have. We've also gone out and done in-person meetings where when we identify, I'll give you a primary example. I've got a client right now that has recently transitioned, went from Santiago to Santi. We have the pronouns. So talking to our team internally about just not necessarily the tolerance piece, but educating them on the right verbiage to use, the right way to approach that without looking like you're uncomfortable, that deer in the headlights look when it's like, oh my gosh, why did that happen? So I think it's just about communication. It's that transparency and knowledge transfer with everybody internally and externally about what your goals are and what we're trying to help them accomplish when we're helping them staff.
So you make some very good points that I want to also highlight for the audience here. When it comes to building what I would call cultural competency about any diverse topic, engage your employees. Ask them who they think they might want to invite for a lunch and learn. Find out, is there a nonprofit in your community that allows you to meet some of the individuals in these different diverse segments to understand their lived experiences more, so everybody has something in common. We tend to look at diversity as you're Black, I'm white, you're Asian, I'm gay, but we all have things in common. We're all human. We want to be treated with respect, and creating more opportunities for people, especially for smaller companies. If you don't have a big diverse workforce, your ability to engage with people from diverse backgrounds will always make you better at understanding why it matters. And also, in your own situation, if you're a white cisgender male, there are situations where you probably haven't been treated with respect that other people might not understand. And so it's helpful for us to make sure we're doing that. So when it comes to understanding, it's learning, developing a knowledge. What are the things you can do to develop that knowledge? Engage your staff, have them help you understand what they say the priorities are about knowledge. A lot of times, organizations will decide, well, oh, we have to do unconscious bias training. But why are you doing it? What's the purpose? Understanding what the objective is, what's the problem you're trying to solve. Start small, do something, see how it goes, then replicate it, versus going out with this, a lot of the challenges I would say some of the mistakes organizations make is they go out and say, this is what we're going to do, but they haven't talked to anybody from diverse backgrounds as to what matters. So I want to close this out by asking each of you this question, and I'll start with you, Felicia. If you would offer one or two tips for a business looking to take that first or next step to create a more LGBT inclusive workplace, what would you share with them?
Number one, educate yourself. Just really what we're putting a bow on it, right? Educate yourself. And what I mean by that is really have a conversation with your team in terms of what diversity and inclusion means to my business. So educate yourself. Also, I would say, make certain that the people that you put in these roles are qualified to do this work. And I hope no one blogs off when I say that. So what I simply mean by that is, I would not think that you would ask your plumber to do your root canal, right? You're probably going to look for someone that may, have a license or maybe a type of certification. So be very mindful that whoever is doing this work is truly qualified to do it. And then also, as you had said earlier, Wes, be comfortable being uncomfortable. None of us are ever going to reach like this perfect, Neverland place where somebody knows everything. We are all learning and growing every day, me included. I'm raising both my hands. And so when you do this work with that open heart like that, I promise you, people are going to resonate to that. So that's what I would suggest.
Thank you, Felicia. Getting uncomfortable. I can't tell you how many times I've helped clients with that, and even myself. I'm always learning every single day. So that's great. And so Tabitha, what are some of the things that you would also add to this conversation?
Felicia stole mine. That's one of our favorite things to talk about too, is get comfortable being uncomfortable. It's that step.
Can't say it enough, Tabitha.
Right.
Can't say it enough.
Step into the gap mentality. The only way to get comfortable doing something you're not comfortable today is to do it more. I think the biggest mistakes for companies from a hiring practice perspective is thinking that either they're so small that their efforts don't matter, or that they don't know where to start, so they just don't. Mm-hmm. Or like to Wes's point, you want to go big. You don't have to go all or nothing. Baby steps is okay. It's little things. It's talking to your existing staff. It's going out and retweet, right? Find a LinkedIn post about Gay Pride Month, or find something about a famous person that's in the LGBTQ community that you can repost somewhere, or, tag some of your employees in it. Listen to your employees' voices, and then turn that into those baby steps, whether it's to say, hey, I know you go to church. I hear you talk about it. You're in the LGBTQ community. We're going to look for somebody for this position. Will you take a job posting and go put that flyer up on the bulletin board at church? Start with the littlest things, because not starting is worse than starting small. And so I think it's just for everybody, and I hate to say it again, but get comfortable being uncomfortable. To Wes's point, you're going to trip up on the way, and that's okay. But not starting is the worst trip you can make, because that's the one that you won't get back up from. So keep trying, keep pursuing it, and be intentional with your actions.
So first of all, I want to say thank you to Felicia and Tabitha for starting us off this morning. You've really given us some great thoughts. The other thing here is all of our speakers, I believe, are willing to be contacted. So at the end, we can make sure that everybody gets their email addresses. So if you want to reach back out, the purpose of these sessions is in part to create a network for you in the communities that you live in, so that you can learn from each other. And that's, as you were saying, what you both were saying, Felicia and Tabitha, start following people on LinkedIn. Just hit the follow button on LGBT organizations, and you'll start to see things in your stream. They'll put articles up. It's the easiest way for you just to start learning about what's going on in the community. And also, you'll find that there's opportunities for free sessions, free education. So that's a really easy way just to start. And if you're a Twitter person, follow people on Twitter. It's a great way to casually and get information without having to really go look for it. So thank you both, and I'm going to pass it back over to Shanique to introduce our next session.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Felicia and Tabitha. And of course, thank you, Wes. One of the questions that was posed in the chat box, the Q&A. So once again, as a reminder to our audience, please feel free to post your questions in the Q&A option that's at the bottom of the screen. But we have a question about the types of programs and initiatives that chambers of commerce and other partner organizations could develop to address unique needs of LGBTQ plus business owners. And so I know you all highlighted different steps that can be taken, but just wanted to check in if there's anything else you wanted to include. And while Felicia and Tabitha are perhaps thinking about adding to the response, I just want to say one thing that we're often mindful of when we're putting together events and panels and such, is making sure that we have a diversity of voices represented and perspectives. We think about it in terms of industries, of course, but also who are the people who are speaking about the work that they're doing on the various issues that we're addressing through our events, through our programming and such. But that's one thing that comes to mind. Felicia,
I can add something in general. I think that I think if you're asking this because you are at a chamber of commerce, partner with organizations in your community. They'll be able to tell you what are the things that are helpful to do. I would say there's always helpful to have a LGBTQ 101 course. What is the terminology of the community? What are the issues this community is facing? And break it down by the things that are, and also your community may be different than another community. There may be other issues that are more specific. You may, if you have a population that's got a high Latino Hispanic population, the challenge is that being Hispanic and Latino and gay may be different than those of Asian people who, and so don't assume that there's no one size fits all for diversity. So again, I would say rely on organizations that, and also talk to other business owners. If you work for a chamber, talk to your members and see what they're doing, and ask them what they want by doing a survey, because they'll tell you what they need. And that, if you're a member-based organization, that's important. But I saw Felicia came off camera, so I don't know if there's something you wanted to add.
Yeah, just very quickly, Shanique, to that and to the addressing the question in the Q&A. Thank you so much for that question. I would really, Wes, just to piggyback on what you said, I was just thinking, offering educational opportunities, and that might look like a quarterly webinar, maybe even a quarterly offering in person, right, around a particular topic. It might be unconscious bias. It might be microaggressions. It might be, how to put inclusion into action. And then the second thing that you could do also is really offer your our member investors, as we call them at the Irving-Las Colinas Chamber of Commerce, is offer them create maybe a library of educational resources around different topics, such as employee resource groups. There may be smaller businesses out there that may be thinking about, maybe doing something like that, but they don't know where to start, right? So, maybe having a toolkit, and then again, just a library of educational resources that may be able to provide support to our smaller businesses. So, thank you.
Well, great. We have to move on at this point. But if there's any other questions people have, they can submit them into the chat. At the end of the session, we will also address other questions that might not have been answered. So when we get through the next panel, we will also have an opportunity if people want to ask questions. So
certainly. Thank you, Wes. And so our next panel is focused on inclusion in the 2022 work environment, and it will focus more so on the corporate sector. So these days and throughout our work, there are nationally recognized benchmarking tools that companies across the country use in terms of their commitments and their efforts towards LGBT equality for their employees and customers. And so this panel will include representatives from Las Colinas business leaders whose companies and organizations have implemented these best practices. So with that, Wes is going to be in conversation with Mr. Brett Dyer from Dallas College and Serena Jameson from Siemens USA. So over to you all.
thank you, Shanique. And a couple of things. One is that when Felicia mentioned employee resource groups, what a great setup for this panel, because we are going to be speaking specifically, at least actually both of our speakers have experience with this, so we can help you understand. An employee resource group is, I would say, it's a group of individuals, it's focused on individuals typically from a specific demographic background who get together and we'll talk. They have multiple purposes in the company. We'll have both Brett and Serena talk about theirs in their companies. So as Shanique said, while we're talking through this, these two individuals work for companies that have lots of employees. And so if you're someone who's online right now looking and you have a bakery and you only got 4 employees, there's a lot of lessons everyone can learn, even from big companies, and you can take away a takeaway. So as we get to the end of their session, we'll ask the same questions. But first, where I'm going to have the same questions asked to Brett Dyer. Brett is the Dean of Gallery, Theater, and Live Event Operations at Dallas College, and he can share with you in a minute how people who live in Dallas certainly know what that college is all about. I learned a lot about it recently. And then we have Serena Jameson, who is a licensed customs broker and import compliance specialist, I think also a lawyer, at Siemens Industry Incorporated. So, so I'll start with you, Brett. Would you tell us what your role and responsibilities are, how long you've worked for the college and in your role, and how many employees work for Dallas College and how many locations?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having us, Wes and Shanique, and thank you to the Chamber of Commerce as well. For Dallas College, we have 412 administrators, 847 full-time faculty members, almost 2,000 full-time support staff, and almost 5,000 part-time faculty and staff. And we have 7 main campuses and several satellite campuses and offices all throughout Dallas College. I feel fortunate to have been working at the college for over 16 years now. I started first as an adjunct faculty member in the art department at El Centro campus and was hired full-time at North Lake campus in 2012. And over the years, I've served in several roles from full-time faculty to faculty treasurer, president, and the dean of visual and performing arts, and as a faculty fellow. And now I've been in this role since June 1st. Part of my responsibilities are it's a really fun job. I've only been in it since June, but I supervise 2 teams that are part of the School of Creative Arts, Entertainment, and Design. And I work with grants, marketing, creating partnerships in the community, opportunities for our students, and help support all of the events that we have for our community and employees. My live events team, they operate 11 theaters and spaces across those colleges. And not only the events we put on, but also community events. And I have a gallery team that maintains 11 galleries and our vast art collection that is also spread across our 7 campuses and multiple locations.
Great, thank you. And Serena, will you do the same about your role at Siemens?
Sure, by all means. I am a import compliance specialist, and I also have some experience in export. I'm a licensed customs broker, and that means that for Siemens Industry US, where we are bringing in hundreds to thousands of shipments per week, that these shipments all have to be processed successfully, go through customs, and handled in such a way as to be legally compliant. As far as Siemens Industry US, they're about 40,000 employees. We have sites in every single state as well as Puerto Rico. As a result, we definitely have to make sure that we are very cognizant of all of the various people that make up our corporation.
Great, that's great. So I'll continue with you, Serena. So when someone asks you what inclusion means at Siemens, how do you answer the question?
Inclusion at Siemens, that is something that thankfully our company has stressed more than a few times. We have set up various trainings. We have set up more than a few HR policies and procedures. We also make sure that we are in the Human Rights Commission. They have a scorecard that, I apologize, Human Rights Campaign, that they have a scorecard that Siemens attempts to score 100 as much as possible. One of the things that has actually been going on throughout this year is the fact that the HRC has changed some aspects of the scorecard. And so instead of it being just a completely HR-based, very insular process, HR reached out to the ERGs and to various other groups and said, hey, we have these new requirements that we would like to meet so that we can still maintain a 100 score on the Corporate Equality Index. So how should we go about meeting those? How should we go about collaborating with those? So Siemens has absolutely set up a very open and inclusive space to listen to multiple voices when it comes to inclusion.
So just to make sure everyone understands what the Corporate Equality Index is, as Shanique mentioned, the Human Rights Campaign is the nation's largest LGBTQ advocacy organization. But one of the roles that they play is helping corporations understand what the definition is or the aspiration is for creating a truly LGBTQ inclusive workplace. And they have a scorecard that has a number of criteria that mostly large corporations apply for, but any company can use the criteria to evaluate their own programs. And You can find, I can put the, in the chat, I can put the URL here, but it's helpful to understand that when you put something into, so what it does is it shows you, here's a best practice approach, and it helps you understand how you're doing against a best practice approach. And so for any organization can say, okay, what does it mean to be best practice when it comes to transgender healthcare? What should my insurance plans cover? What questions should I be asking my insurer? What are the things that are important when it comes to what maternity, paternity options should be, our adoption support for any employee, regardless of whether or not they are the individual that is adopting the child or the caretaker. So there's a whole aspect of that. And so what Serena is, and we'll get a little bit more into this in a little bit, these are programs that are multidimensional in nature, and that they help an organization understand what are the needs of their employees and what might we do, how might we look at our workplace policies and procedures to see if we're doing the best we can be doing to create an equitable workplace. So Brett, I'm going to go back to you, because when we spoke, you work for an organization that employs close to 8,000 people spread out about 7 campuses. So creating a consistent, inclusive workplace experience when you have spread out, and this is the same thing for Siemens, I would imagine, is not easy. And one way you told me that has helped embed LGBTQ inclusion into Dallas College's DNA was through its LGBTQ employee resource group. So can you tell the audience about this ERG and what it does to raise awareness about who LGBTQ people are at Dallas College?
Sure. Yes, we started our ERG, I think it was around 2019. My campus president, Dr. Krista Slako, asked to speak with me, and she was really interested in starting an ERG for the LGBT plus employees. And as we formed, it kind of started more as just meetings. The pandemic, of course, hit, and we were mostly meeting through Teams and other online platforms. And as we just got together and we talked more about our mission, our goals, we selected officers, we started planning events. And over the last few years, we've provided professional development sessions. We've organized events in the community. We meet regularly with our diversity, equity, and inclusion department. And we also make sure to have plenty of fun gatherings for our ERG members. We have a team site for them. We have several resources on our website for both students and employees. And, I think part of what inclusion means at Dallas College, our mission statement is transforming lives through higher education. And I know a lot of us that have gone, through higher education, it's very true. And I think that should include everyone. And it means that everyone should feel like they belong, with maybe not and having to give an explanation, and knowing that they're welcome and they have the same opportunities, protection, and rights as all the other employees.
What are some of the topics in the professional development programs, and can you talk a little bit about what they look like?
Sure. One that I participated in, I think it was a little over a year ago. We have a conference day and a professional development day. And so I worked with one of our ERG officers on giving a presentation to faculty and staff about how to create a more inclusive environment for our trans students. And that was an event that was open for all employees to join virtually, and they received credit for attending. And it was such a wonderful experience hearing the questions that people had, and them knowing that they had a safe place to even ask those questions, to learn, and to maybe rethink about things that they hadn't really had the opportunity to before. We've also had several panel discussions that we record and we share out to the college. One this summer was over how to make our students feel more, our LGBT plus students feel more comfortable on campus, and kind of the progress that's been made and the progress that still needs to be made. And then just recently for Coming Out Day, we had a session that was about coming out and just finding our voice and celebrating that. And it was a panel discussion I moderated with several other professionals throughout the college. And we talked about a variety of different topics.
Thank you for that, Brett. One of the things that that storytelling is such an important part of creating an inclusive workplace, and having the opportunity for people to hear each other's stories is, especially for people who aren't necessarily LGBTQ, helps people understand what an individual's lived experience is, how they experience a situation that another person might be in the same room, but not understand how the experience might be different. And so I want to shift to Serena about storytelling, because during our conversation, you shared your journey of what it was like to come out as transgender at Siemens about 2.5 years ago. And coming out is never easy for anyone, but particularly daunting for those who are transgender, as we've seen, unfortunately, in the news all the time. What many people might understand is that transitioning is a process that can take years and can mean lots of different things, including potentially changing your appearance or changing your name, and those issues. What can you tell us about your journey and how the policies and procedures that Siemens had supported transgender individuals, so that people could understand from a workplace standpoint, what are the things that an employer faces, but also what you face, and how to create this transition so that it's a process that's not stressful and it's respectful for you. So can you share a little bit more about that, like you shared with me?
Sure, by all means. So even before I finally came out of the closet and started transitioning, it was really important for my company to be a company that was inclusive, that had tolerance for others, because without this tolerance, without this atmosphere of me feeling like I could come out without reprisal or without fear, that helped me immensely. I will absolutely go into this discussion too, as far as I know that and I've talked with others where work is an extension of someone's life. There's more than a few things that just can't be kept at the house, and then there's a huge cutoff, and then it comes to work. You can certainly have employees that absolutely, they might be underperforming for whatever reason. And some of them might be underperforming because of the environment that they're in, the corporate culture that has been cultivated around them. And thankfully, Siemens has never had that level of corporate culture that has ever made me feel afraid of being who I am. And so as I came out, thankfully, I had supportive coworkers. I've had supportive managements. I've even had supportive HR. There's been more than a few times that I had to speak with HR about, for instance, health benefits. And I have now cultivated a relationship not only with my HR person, but even with my health insurance company, where I speak with them on a consistent basis. It very much has been a team building experience, but for my own care. And so that's been a really important aspect of me being able to be a successful employee, is to be able to build these teams that will not only help me, but they will also help the company, because I have gone to bat more than a few times for the company and said to other folks who are transitioning, and said, this is my experience and this is how I managed to get through these challenges. This is in some ways institutional knowledge that I feel is very important for our company as a whole.
So as I mentioned, companies like Siemens and typically I would say larger companies actually have done a best practice of creating what's known as a gender transition process, which actually is a step-by-step process that from the minute an employee says, I would like to transition, once they indicate that to somebody, there's a set of steps and processes that go into place that managers are trained on, so that when it happens, the individual who is coming out doesn't experience a uncomfortable or disrespectful situation. But there's a number of steps in that process. It includes, how is the individual employee plan to do that? What is their timeline? When it comes to if they decide to change their appearance, what is the way in which they want to do it? How do you communicate this to your coworkers and your colleagues in a way that is helpful? What information and knowledge do they need to have? But it also involves some legal changes which make life at work more complicated, which is changing your name and legally, and your social security number. So can you talk a little bit about what you experienced and how these factors, while some might feel that they're small with relationship to your email address and your badge, how it affected your experience and what you might say to other employers about what they should be thinking about that's important for them, as if they have an employee that comes to them to say they want to transition?
Yes. So when I came out in May of 2020, one of the very first things that actually happened was so our email system has a mask. So it says that emails come from a name, such as my own name, Serena Jameson. However, our email structure was set up in such a way that my former first name and my last name are incorporated in my email address. And so it sadly took our company more than a couple months for that to be changed, because they insisted that they would not change it up until the point that I had actually performed a legal name change. Legal name changes take sometimes weeks and sometimes months in certain systems, and sometimes even longer than multiple months. And so it took me, from the time I came out, it was about 9 months by the time I finally finished my legal name change. And then it was another additional month and a half for my Social Security to catch up. And this is the challenge for more than a few transgender folks, especially those who might not have the funds to even attempt to do a legal name change immediately, which thankfully I was able to have done. So that's one aspect. And another aspect was I had a name badge that had my old face and my old name on it, and that was not updated for a number of months as well. And because our security policies mandate that we carry our name badges on us at all times, that meant that I had to have this name badge that would effectively out me to anyone who cared to look at it. And another aspect was seating and location. I had said to my company that I was hoping to make a clean break of my previous identity to my new identity, despite the fact that I still had the same tasks and responsibilities. I asked them, would it be possible, especially since you have all of this office space and some of it is empty, for me to be able to change my location of work? So that way, people who might expect the old person sitting there would come into my cube and not see that old person, and they might have a bit of some kind of emotion about that. And so I said, well, it would be good for me to be in a different location, so that way it signifies an additional break in my presentation. So there were some aspects that, thankfully, many of these aspects were handled by COVID. I am currently working from home remotely, primarily, so that has certainly changed my location. So there are ways that the company has certainly still attempted to help me in the middle of these transitions.
So the takeaway here is there's many aspects for an employer who is wondering what it might be like the first time someone comes to them to say that they're going to transition. There's a number of aspects about it, and there are resources online. You can actually Google gender transition guidelines online, and you can get sample policies. So if you want to understand what's involved, it also means that the company should be more educated about, they can provide knowledge and assistance in changing an employee's name, um, understanding where to point the employee so that that's where the ERG comes in. The employee resource group can serve as a resource to an employer to help them, point them in the direction of the right resource, the best practice organization that can provide HR as well as the rest of the business resources and information to ensure that if the organization achieves its objective of creating a space for everyone to be welcome, if that's what the company says. And so when you go to, there are some tools on the LGBTQ Inclusion Hub for small businesses as well. So if there's anybody out there that is looking for resources, you can always email us here at the Chamber to get more information. And Brett, so I want to go back to you on the ERG, because you talked to me about coming out and how that helped provide education to leadership about what it was like to be LGBTQ on campus. So can you talk about how your decision to come out and how that has, in what ways it's impacted how leadership at the college has made changes or shifted their approach to inclusion overall?
I'm sure. Yeah, I've worked at several colleges outside of Dallas County, and there were several of those where I would have former colleagues. I think in their mind it was looking out for me. They would say, you may want to tone this down a little bit, or they would be like, what does your wife do? And they would just ask these questions, and I could always kind of tell that they were prying, and it felt it didn't feel like the most safe and welcoming environment. And when I started full-time at Northlake campus of Dallas College, it felt like a much more welcoming space. And probably around, I think it was around 2015, this is before we had the ERG, there were two psychology professors that reached out, and they asked, hey, do you want to be on this social injustice panel? And that's for students and employees. And I said yes, and at the time I think I was in a faculty leadership role, and so I wasn't sure if they were, wanting someone just from the faculty leadership to be there, or if they were asking me, for some other reason. I think I had some people knew at work, from individual conversations, but I hadn't ever publicly, said I'm gay or I'm part of the LGBT community. And so during the panel discussion, I think I was the last person, to speak. I just saw hundreds of students in the audience and employees, and it was a very bittersweet period for me, because prior, maybe a month before that, me and my husband had just gotten married, and we had a small ceremony in our home because a lot of our family, is just not accepting, and it was it's always kind of a being happy, but then also knowing that other people, are finding your life challenging. It's, very hard. And so as I was in front of all these people, I was just thinking, oh, this is, how do I know how they're going to react? A lot of the laws had not changed. And so it was I felt very vulnerable. And, but I just made sure to, let the students know about my journey. When I was 21, 22, I think was when I came out to one of my parents, and they outed me to everyone. And I kind of lost everything. Connections to the church. I've been an honor student all through high school. I've worked since I was 15. And it just felt like all those things that I had worked so hard for, that didn't matter because of this one thing that other people never cared to really ask about, or to know who I was, or even try to suppress, from my character and my being. And so whenever I was in college and that was all going on, it was pretty devastating. And then to find financial support to continue to go to school, I had been supporting myself, but for students that are under 21, it's very challenging to get a dependency override. Especially when you're not, able to really interact with your family because of things like this. So I thought, despite the fear that I was experiencing, it was really important to share this with students. It's important for our student services to know that what our students are going through. And it was such a wonderful experience though, because right after the presentation, the comments and support and feedback from students. It was pretty amazing. And I think from that there was a faculty member and employee that started passing out rainbow stickers for employees to put outside of their offices to just let students know that they were that was a safe place and a safe person to talk to. And it just seemed like after that panel, everything started coming into place to help us form the ERG that we do have now. So before we wrap up and asking the final question, first of all, I want to thank both of you for sharing your stories. In addition to saying all the time that inclusion is an intentional act, I always say that storytelling is the secret weapon that we as a community have in helping people understand who we are and understand why it matters. And I really believe that most people, especially employers, really have good intentions, and often they just don't think about things that are different than who they are as whatever that demographic is. And they're willing to learn. And when we as individuals come out ourselves, we've taken a long time to come to that point. And when you go and approach an employer with a request or about a policy or a procedure that they've never done, remember that they're starting that journey of understanding why that matters. Now, as we get further and further along in society, we would hope that organizations should not take as long as they do. But our job here is to help people understand that it's a very nuanced issue about what it means to be inclusive. And so what is important for everyone to think about is being intentional. Ask questions. Find out what people, just because somebody is gay, people might not think they go to church because churches aren't always necessarily accepting. There are a lot of there are many people who are very faith-based people who are LGBTQ, and there are people that aren't LGBTQ. So as we go through this, the things that I would say to wrap up this piece before we ask the final questions is there's a lot of resources that an organization itself can have. If you're looking to understand what the experience is of an LGBTQ person at your workplace, if you don't have an ERG, you can turn to other organizations outside, or if there are people inside, you can ask them for their experience. One caution I would say as a diversity consultant over the years, just because someone is gay or just because someone is transgender, just because someone is Black, doesn't make them an expert on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. They are a point of view for you to help you, but as Felicia said earlier, there is a skill in doing this. So understand that I have too many clients that made a decision because they spoke to one gay person on something, and so that became their mantra. So Serena, what would you, if you had any tips for a business looking to take that first step to create a more inclusive place for transgender people, what would you say that would be?
The one thing I would stress is the fact that honestly, you don't know who might be transgender. In my travels, I have spoken with more than a few folks who experience some feelings of what's called gender dysphoria, which is feelings of incongruence between themselves and the gender that they were assigned at birth. Some of them made the choice and said, I have to come out of the closet. And others have made the choice to say, there's too many attachments that I have in my life that prevent me from being able to come out of the closet. And so if you have a work environment that is more welcoming to people who might still be in the closet, they certainly, I would feel like they would be a much better contributor. And the more that you can give them that inclusive environment, the more that they might be able to open up, and they might be able to actively bring themselves forward and learn that it's okay to take risks. It's okay to do things that might be unconventional, because after all, a lot of what we need to do in the business realm is to figure out ways that we can solve problems and to get through challenges. And sometimes we do have to think unconventionally to do that.
So you reminded me of something I wanted to say earlier, which is every company should have workplace conduct guidelines. What you define as acceptable behavior across the board. We often see We have to take ethics training. We have to take sexual harassment training. But in this day and age of polarization, we don't have what's acceptable conversation training. We don't have how to engage with people on uncomfortable situations. When is it appropriate to wear a shirt that might have something that might be politicizing? How do you address that? So creating a standard of what acceptable behavior is and isn't, and making sure that everybody understands that, ensures that when it comes to making derogatory statements or jokes about somebody, that's not acceptable behavior regardless of who the person is. So that when a situation happens, you can show that you're enforcing it. One of the biggest challenges companies have is they selectively enforce their conduct guidelines, so people don't see that there's any repercussion for not doing it. So Brett, as we wrap up this, what would you say? Any tips, a couple of tips that you would say to an organization looking to take their first or next step?
Sure. I would say don't force it. Have gatherings, let your employees tell you what they would like, and let them be involved in the process. I loved that about Dallas College. We had input on t-shirts we wanted to make. We had input on what kind of events we wanted, how often we wanted to meet. I think another thing is, celebrate everything, that you can, to show that support's there. But you have to also understand, that you have to hold people accountable, as you were saying, and also respect people's privacy. We have some ERG groups that, visually, people like, it's things people can see. And then with the LGBT group, sometimes we have people that come that are allies. Sometimes we have people that are questioning. And so, one thing we often stress is, when we have meetings and things like that, you want to keep it private and think of everyone's best wishes in terms of coming together and how we're representing as a whole, within the college.
Well, I want to thank Brett and Serena today for also providing their perspectives as larger employers, but more importantly, helping. I hope all of the speakers helped you understand more about what inclusion means from an LGBTQ perspective. I want to remind you that there is the LGBTQ Inclusion Hub for Small Businesses. If somebody I don't seem to have the ability to speak to the participants, but if you can put that link in the chat for the participants. So I'll turn it back to you, Shanique.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much, Brett and Serena, for speaking more about your experiences and how you have worked at your different companies and organizations to ensure inclusivity is part of the mission and the work that you do, and for highlighting how they have been helpful and supportive in your journey as well. So as I said, if anyone has questions, please feel free to add it to the Q&A option at the bottom of the screen. Thank you all for joining us. And at this point in time, I'm going to turn to Wes to highlight any additional resources that you want to share. I know you mentioned the small business.
Well, I think it was the hub itself.
Okay.
Was what I was referring to at this point. So that was what I was referring to.
Okay, wonderful. Well, with that, I just wanted to say thank you to everyone for taking the time to join us today for this important discussion on LGBTQ+ inclusion. And I also want to thank all of our speakers, our partners at the Gill Foundation, and the Irving-Las Colinas Chamber of Commerce for making today a success. Now, throughout today's conversation, our speakers covered some key topics, such as how does action translate in our organization's commitment to diversity and inclusion, the importance of employee engagement in developing and implementing sustainable inclusion efforts, including the crucial role of employee resource groups. How does your organization's digital footprint and presence translate, and what does it say about the business, the organization, and their commitment to these issues? And also, you have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. That's where growth happens. So with that, we want to encourage all of you to consult the Inclusion Hub for Small Business on the Chamber of Commerce Foundation's website, and feel free to reach out to us with any questions. But with that, I want to thank all of you for joining us today.